This is the video you've been waiting for. Today we're going to test out 5 popular games at practically maxed out settings and check out the performance, temperatures, battery, even the shoulder buttons. So hit the thumbs up if you're excited and let's get started. Selamat pagi. Good morning everyone, Kenneth here, and today I'm super excited to share this in-depth 2 hours plus gaming session that I've recorded for you, which includes Mobile Legends, PUBG Mobile, Pokémon Unite, Apex Legends, as well as Genshin Impact at the end. And the most important thing is we're gonna answer the question once and for all, does the POCO F4 GT overheat? I've got the numbers to answer that, but before we start, full disclosure is in the description, which basically says I'm always telling you my own honest opinion. Also, please help me support the channel by using the affiliate links in the description. Subscribe for more videos about audio and tech stuff. And yeah, let's get straight onto the test. So what you see here is the POCO F4 GT with 12 gigs of RAM running MIUI 13.0.2 global. It's still plugged in, so we start fresh at 100% battery, and bear in mind that the result you'll see in this video will be the same for the base 8 gigs of RAM, since generally games don't use anything more than 6 gigs of RAM during this test. And that's what I'm gonna do. I will always clear up the applications for each game. So let's unplug the charger now and fire up Mobile Legends, which is the first game we're going to test. And right now, the phone is pretty much room temperature at 35 to 36 degrees on both the screen and the back. The room is at 29 degrees without AC turned on, by the way. And let's take a look at the settings. There are a couple of refresh rates available here. Low for 30 FPS, high for 60 FPS, super runs at 90 FPS, and finally ultra at 120 frames per second. Because we're looking for the heat limits here, let's max out at both ultra refresh rate and graphic settings. Alright. Let's start a classic game now and confirm once again that battery is at 100% and screen brightness will always be at about 75% with auto brightness turned off. So in the first game, there wasn't anything super busy. Sometimes when I throw some skills, it could dip down to 109 frames per second, but generally the gameplay is still very fluid and very impressive nonetheless. So unfortunately, we had to surrender the game here, but after about 8 minutes of play, the phone warmed up to 43 degrees at the top where the chipset is, but we got a relatively chill 39 degrees on the bottom where the charging IC is placed. Anyway, let's quickly start another game and note that the battery is still 99% after 12 minutes of maxed out Mobile Legends. And also the match fully loads in 9 seconds, which pretty much smokes all the other players here, which took another 29 seconds after the F4 GT finished loading. So we're starting out at 42 degrees on the top and 40 degrees at the bottom, which then increased to 44 and 40 respectively after 4 minutes of gameplay, but it's still just warm to the touch. And take a closer look at this part. Now that we have a bit of action going on, you can see some dip to 107 FPS with skills and everything, but it still feels very smooth and definitely there's no sign of thermal throttling here. Here's another busy clip of a war, and for 1 second there we can see it got to the lowest point of 106 FPS. But again, the game still feels really smooth, and quickly we surrendered the game yet again. We have been playing for quite some time though, so I gotta move on to the next game. And by the end of this half an hour gameplay, we have 92% battery left, and the phone stays warm at 44 degrees on the top and 40 degrees on the bottom. And it does a great job distributing the heat to the front and back equally here. And yeah, let's close Mobile Legends and fire up PUBG Mobile as the second game, and let's immediately start a game right away. So as for the maxed out settings here, I could go with HDR Extreme, which runs at 60 FPS, but I want to try the Ultra HD setting, which is an additional download, though the frame rate is capped at Ultra 40 FPS. And that's what we're going to use in this test. Now let's talk about the shoulder buttons. To set it up, you need to open the Game Turbo plugin. And here I've set my left button to aim and right button to fire. But you can really assign it to tap anywhere you like. And starting with the drop sequence, I'm happy to report that the frame rate stays around 37 to 40 FPS from the plane all the way to the ground, which is awesome. And that's the same during the whole gameplay. Solid 38 to 40 FPS no matter what you do. I just Can't help but wonder, maybe we can even push 60 FPS just fine with some modding. Also, I just wanted to take a second and say the shoulder buttons are awesome. It makes me fire my shots much faster, and along with the gyro aiming, it really feels like a cheat code. Anyway, here's a clip of me driving around the map. 41 degrees at the top and 39 degrees at the bottom, super fluid, and the phone is pretty much chilling at this point. The frame rate is still a solid 38 to 40 FPS. At this point, I've been playing for almost an hour now, and the phone is still at 41 degrees top and 39 degrees bottom. The battery is now at 82%, and that pretty much concludes the PUBG test, which surprisingly didn't push the phone that much. Anyway, let's move on to the next game. Here we have a newcomer MOBA, Pokémon Unite. So the settings here are relatively simple, and I've pretty much maxed out everything, which we'll see in game that it runs at 60 FPS. But now starting off with a quick 3v3 battle. We can see that we're starting with a temp reading of 40 top and 38 bottom, and generally I could say the whole entire game is a locked 60 FPS experience. Only sometimes we can see the number drop to 57 FPS during Blastoise's ultimate animation, for example, but that's really impossible to notice in real life gameplay. Now moving on to the classic 5v5 game, first things first, I wanted to quickly highlight the flexibility of the shoulder trigger here, which in my case was set to the score button, which is quite small and hard to reach originally. And that tactile physical button helps a lot in letting me know that I am in the process of scoring a goal. Now moving on to the actual gameplay, this is a little bit more interesting because while we see similar numbers as before in the beginning of the game, but once we get into the late game, when we got more fights, more wars, more enemies, there are a lot more skill animations going on, and actually the FPS could drop as far as 40 FPS, even 32 for a brief moment. This is especially true when we got into the Zapdos fight at the very end. It was unfortunate that the FPS meter got covered here, but we could see for most of the time it was a 30 FPS affair. But honestly speaking, if I don't look at the FPS meter, I hardly notice it since it was quite a tense game. Fortunately, we won the game, and after playing for about 20 minutes, the phone is sitting at 41 degrees top and 38 degrees bottom. Not very much changed there, but the battery is now 75%. It's a very chilly gaming session, just like PUBG. And yeah, let's just move on to the next game then. Apex Legends, high hopes on this one to push the phone to its limits. So taking a look at the settings real quick, again we have two different maxed out settings here. One is extreme HD image and extremely high frame rate, and the other one is original image but is capped at balanced frame rate. Don't worry, we're going to test both here, but let's start with the former first. So starting with a quick temperature reading, we are now at 41 degrees top and 38 degrees bottom, just like before. And yeah, we're gonna start analyzing the drop sequence now. So while you are on the plane, the game was running at 60 FPS, but as soon as you hit the drop button, the frame rate quickly dropped to just below 50 FPS. Then when you almost reach the ground, you get a dip down to 22 FPS just for the game to load the map in more detail. On my previous test with the POCO X3 Pro, this same map loading part was actually much worse under the same setting. It dropped down to 4 FPS for a few seconds, even on the lowest image setting. I'll put the video link below so you could watch it, but my point is the F4 GT is a much better experience compared to the X3 Pro. Now that we are on the ground, it's interesting to see that we never actually hit 60 FPS ever again. At first it stayed at 50, but then it quickly dropped down to 40 FPS for the entirety of the game, and not sure what happened here, but perhaps the game prioritizes frame rate stability more than anything, as otherwise it's a pretty much rock solid 40 FPS gameplay. Shoulder buttons do wonders here in Apex, as there are a lot of actions you need to take care of, such as sliding and jumping on top of aiming and shooting, and being able to control all that with different fingers makes the entire game that much more fun, although my decisions made me lose the first match rather quickly. So considering that we're running at 40 FPS, does it mean the phone was chilling? Well, I can say the phone is probably at its limit here. It was quite a toasty one, about 45 degrees at the top portion and 40 degrees at the bottom portion, but it's still not overheating by any means. The chip definitely didn't throttle, and once again the vapor chamber does a good job distributing heat to the front and back side equally. Now let's test out the other setting combo, which is the original image quality, but keep in mind the frame rate is capped at balanced 30 FPS here. Let's start another game, or actually we're going to skip this one since I died before I could do anything. But yeah, about 15 minutes has passed since we started playing. Now we are at 68% battery. The temperature has cooled down to about 42 top and 40 bottom, and take a close look at the FPS meter here. During the drop, it went down to 20 FPS, which is about the same as the first game. And although in the second game that I skipped, I saw it drop to 15 FPS. So this is a little bit more, taxing on the chip, but everything loads up very quickly, so it's not that big of a deal. We've got quite some action going on here. Shoulder buttons comes in on clutch, and my aiming is bad as ever, but the frame rate stays at 29 to 30 FPS virtually all the time, no matter what happens, and I think that's preferable compared to the potential of having an inconsistent 40 to 50 or even 60 FPS gameplay. So by the end of this quick 6 minutes gameplay, we only used up 1% battery. The temperature is still at 43 degrees top and 40 degrees bottom, which means the phone is being pushed quite hard, even though not as much as the previous setting. So I decided to play one last game on Team Deathmatch mode with the same original balance setting, and yeah, here's some more footage for you to look at. 5v5 in a small map, a lot of action going on here. I've used Bloodhound skill a lot, as well as the ultimate later on, and despite all that effort, the game runs at a smooth and solid 30 frames per second. Also, I must say the game looks quite decent here. It's a huge upgrade from the lowest setting that I recommended on my POCO X3 Pro, and as a result, I am more than happy with the performance, and the phone doesn't get too hot as well, staying at 43 top and 40 bottom, just like before. That's just really warm to the touch, honestly. Now that we are done with Apex, about 24 minutes of gameplay with 64% battery remaining, let's fire up Genshin Impact as the last game and see how well it runs. So first things first, loading time is a big kicker on the POCO X3 Pro or any older phone in this regard. But the F4 GT passed with flying colors here because not only the chipset is fast, but the storage and RAM complements it, making it possible for the game to load in 21 seconds and basically, teleport between places on the map very, very quickly. Let me know down below if you want me to make a side-by-side comparison of this. So starting off with the settings, as always, I pretty much maxed out all the settings again, so we're on the highest preset here, and then I've changed the FPS to 60. I've restarted the game once again just to make sure everything is working, and well, depending on where you are, you can get a choppy 20 FPS gameplay like this one on Inazuma Street, or you can get a smoother 40 FPS like this one in Spiral Abyss. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is we're going to complete a floor here, and the phone is now at 38 degrees top and 35 degrees bottom. And let's see some highlight of the battle. In the first part, we can see Xingqiu's E or Ningguang stones making the FPS drop down to 27 FPS, and in the next team I got a lot of full screen animations going on, and it seems like the frame rate only dropped to 31 FPS. Only for a brief moment when I switched character, changed the view abruptly and got plenty of other small tidbits going on, it went down to 24 FPS, but that's really the worst thing that I could find. Next up, during the single enemy type fights, the frame rate pretty much stays at a little more than 40 FPS all the time, no matter what the skills I use. And in the next team, I could see it going as low as 35 FPS, especially with Qiqi's sigils applied to multiple Sijin mage, including the bats she controls. But that only lasted for a second, and after that's gone, with just the 2 pyro agents, it's gone back to like very smooth 40 FPS. So by the end of this 15-minute Spiral Abyss run, we're now back at 43 degrees top and slightly above 38 degrees bottom, and let's continue moving around the map doing something. So I wanted to know how will it perform in the effects heavy thunder manifestation boss fight, and well, I guess it is taxing enough to have a brief moment of 29 FPS, but I never feel like it hinders the fluidity in any way. And well, even with my whatever team here, I could beat the boss just fine. Now moving on to the next one, we're going to do a Raiden weekly boss run and give it a slightly better team here. Temperature wise, we are up to almost 44 degrees top and 39 degrees bottom. And again, a lot of effects going on with this boss, but we're still running at 43 to 45 FPS here, which is great. Even after Raiden transformed, the only low parts I could spot is when the hands clapped together on me, which dipped down to 38 FPS, and when Raiden was charging her attack, that was 36 FPS, but it's still not a big deal. As you can see from the 60 FPS recording, the game still runs very fluidly. You can, see it for yourself. And yeah, that was a pretty fun 4 minutes of boss fight, and it ended up with 44 degrees top and 40 degrees bottom. Alright, for the last thing we're going to do in Genshin here, I have the scene of me gliding down and looking around for the scenery, and on the highest setting, 60 FPS that we used before, we can see some jitters on a mostly 30 FPS business, and then changing the setting to high but still 60 FPS, we can see it improved to almost 40 FPS, but still, the 30 FPS dips are there. Once again, I lowered the setting to medium 60 FPS. I tried to pick some fights with nearby enemies, but it still runs the game at about 40 FPS. Adding more to this, I've tested various settings after the recording and found that the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 is actually incapable of running the game at 60 FPS unless you are facing just a rock or a grass, and even on the lowest setting, the best it can go is 50 something frames per second. The frequent dips will still be there, and you lose a lot of image quality with shadows practically gone and some blurry low-res textures. So yeah, a solid 30 FPS is actually more than enough for this game, and we ended up the play session with 43 degrees top and 40 degrees bottom. 2 hours and 11 minutes of total playtime. We went from full battery down to 51%. So yeah, very impressive battery life here. You can get about 4 hours of gaming at maxed out settings, which should be more than enough for almost anyone. And in case you need more, the 120 watt charging will top up the battery in record numbers, although it depends hugely on how hot your phone is. So subscribe to see the charging test. You definitely won't be disappointed. But yeah, the purpose of this video is to stress test the phone and see how hot it could get in real life gaming. And to be honest with you, I am very impressed at how good the phone is in managing heat on these maxed out settings, except for Mobile Legends that runs at 120 FPS, but it still never got the phone up until 47 degrees or even thermal throttling, which I actually managed to do while simultaneously streaming, playing, and charging the phone. But that's another topic for another day, and I'm going to stop right here. If you found the video useful, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe for more, and follow me on Instagram or Twitter to follow the latest thing I cover. Also, comment down below if you have any other questions, and I want to thank you so much for watching. I'm Kenneth, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.